Now, when you talk about these things, somebody in the audience must come up, I assume, and say, well, we only understand 4% of this stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
So
I love it.
How is that different from Bill O'Reilly saying, well, in that case, the rest of it's God, and you guys are you're just expounding beliefs here. You've got no evidence. For the 96%.
The difference is, we do understand the tides. The tides are part of the 4% we understand. So Bill O'Reilly is giving a list of things that are fully understood. If he had given a list of things that are not understood, okay, that would be a different reaction. And it would be less susceptible to comedic mockery than saying, tides come in and out, you can't explain that. It's like, yes, we can. We've known that one for the last couple of 100 years. Give me a better example. So if he said, there's dark matter and there's dark energy forcing an expansion of the universe so fast that it's accelerating. You can't explain that. Right. We can't explain it. Okay. I don't think he knows enough physics to be able to tell us what it is we don't understand yet. That would have been a more interesting exchange with the atheist guy. I forgot his name, forgive me, but the guy who he was interviewing. Now, if he wants to use that as evidence for God, but then we just have to come back and say, well, doesn't mean if you don't understand something and the community of physicists don't understand it, that means God did it? Is that how you want to play this game? Because if it is, here's a list of the things in the past that the physicists at the time didn't understand. And a talk show you might have conducted 200 years ago would have said, the planets do retrograde? Can't understand that, must be a God. And we'd say, you know, you're right. And then 10 years later, we understand it, so what do? So if that's how you want to invoke your evidence for God, then God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance that's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as time moves on. So just be ready for that to happen, if that's how you want to come at the problem. So that's just simply the God of the gaps argument. It's been around forever.
So in fact, people who want to make arguments...
And by the way, wait, and I don't even mind, I don't even care if someone wants to say, you don't understand that, God did it. That doesn't even bother me. What would bother me is if you were so content in that answer that you no longer had curiosity to learn how it happened. If the day you stop looking because you're content God did it, I don't need you in the lab. You're useless on the frontier of understanding the nature of the world. And if the world had been, I'm glad whoever those folks are, there aren't that many of them. Because if they dominated the world, we'd still be in the cave. We would have never left the cave. Because there are mysterious things out there, and no, God is doing that, and you don't need to know that, and don't even think about it. Where would we be if their understanding of the world ruled the world? So I don't mind it, but just don't prevent others from conducting that investigation themselves.
Yeah.
I do not believe that religion is the root of all evil. Thank you, Channel 4. Religion is the root of quite a lot of evil, but that didn't make for a very catchy title. I just want to briefly reply to Dr. Spivey a couple of points. He says we're fighting a losing battle because religion is a part of our human nature. Well, speak for yourself. It's not a part of mine, and it's not a part of the great majority of my friends in universities in England and the United States and elsewhere. He also said, if we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living, and in the time when the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was. We shall never know the ceiling that Michelangelo might have painted if he had been commissioned to paint the Museum of Science, for example. We shall never know what Haydn's Evolution oratorio might have sounded like, or Beethoven's Mesozoic Symphony. Now, I suppose that apologists for religion would be likely to put forward 4 reasons for believing it to be a good thing, 4 things that religion does for us, and I call them explanation, exhortation, meaning morals, explanation meaning explaining the world, where we come from, where the universe comes from, and so on. Exhortation, what is good, what is bad. Inspiration, and consolation. And I think my colleague Anthony Grayling is likely to cover some aspects of exhortation. I shall be brief on that, therefore. Consolation, I often encounter people who say, but if you take religion away from people, how are they going to survive? How are they going to manage when they're bereaved, or when they lose a loved one, when they fear death themselves? And it's a reasonable point. It is certainly possible to obtain consolation from a lie. Many people will say, if you ask them, would you like your doctor to tell you when you have a mortal illness and you're only going to live another 6 months? There are people who will say, no, I would rather my doctor lied to me. And that's fine, and I would respect that wish if I were a doctor, if I thought that a patient wanted to be lied to. But I don't think it's a very dignified, general reason for supporting religion, that it supplies consolation, unless, of course, it's true. And we haven't time to go into it, but I think there are very, very good reasons for thinking that there is absolutely no grounds for believing that there's any actual truth in the claims of religion. So those who gain consolation from religion, I must confess that I rather liken it to a child with a dummy in its mouth. I don't think it's a very dignified, a very respect-worthy posture for an adult to go around sucking a dummy with a comforter, which is what I think it essentially is. Inspiration, well, I've always found the inspiration, the heavens declare the glory of God, all things bright and beautiful, and so on, to be paltry, parochial, small-minded, compared to the inspiration that you can get by looking at the world of science. Deep space, deep time, as the late Carl Sagan showed us. Deep complexity in the study of life. The scientific study of these profound, beautiful, elegant mysteries is one of the greatest achievements of the human spirit. And insofar as religion offers an alternative or even positively stands in the way of scientific activity, then I think we would be well rid of it. Which brings me to the other of my 4 categories, explanation. In the field of explanation, science has all the cards. Religion used to aspire to a reasonably good hand, but no longer. There is no reason to suppose that any religion, any religious book, any religious teacher has anything to say whatsoever about such questions as where the universe comes from, what life is all about, what life is for, any of those questions, which once upon a time religion provided the best available answers. These are now completely washed up. There is no evidence for them at all. And it's worse than that, because the point I want to end up with is that religion debauches education insofar, and it's quite a long way, insofar as it interferes with the education of children and students. It's not just the teaching of falsehoods, it is that the indoctrination of children in the virtues of faith leads them to be immunized, to be placed on their guard against the enemies of faith who they are told will come. It's as though it's rather like a computer erecting a firewall to prevent incoming information. I have talked to colleagues in America, scientists attempting to lecture to students on their subject, biology, and of course biology makes no sense without evolution. And whenever a lecturer mentions evolution, he sees a great sea of heads shaking, arms folded, and they are not listening. They are trained to give the right answers, they're trained to tick the right boxes when they do the exam, they know how to answer an exam on evolution, but they have been forewarned, forearmed by the firewall of faith. Whenever a teacher says anything about evolution, in effect, stop up your ears. Now that is debauching of education. A quote from Kurt Wise, who is an American geologist. He studied geology at Harvard, no less, under Stephen Jay Gould, no less, and he was set for a good career as an academic geologist, which all his life he had desperately wanted. The problem was, it came from within, it was his religious upbringing, his firewall of faith. And he couldn't reconcile the two, his scientific education with his religion, and he literally got a pair of scissors and went right through the Bible and cut out every verse that would have to go if he accepted his scientific education. And in the end, he decided there was nothing left of his Bible. He therefore tossed out science and said, and from then on, he said, with that in great sorrow, I tossed into the fire all my dreams and hopes in science. And he goes on, I am a young age creationist because that is my understanding of the scripture. As I shared with my professors years ago when I was in college, if all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. Here I must stand. If religion can do that to a highly educated Harvard geologist, just think what it can do to an average school child or student. Thank you.
And I'll begin at once by recalling an exchange I had recently in Colorado Springs with a spokesman of America's evangelical broadcasting wing, a much overrated but nonetheless significant force in American politics. This broadcaster asked me, in response to my own statement of unbelief, he said, I insist that you answer the following question, and that you answer it with a yes or a no. I braced myself. I accepted the challenge unseen. He said, you are to imagine yourself in a strange city where you've never been before. You are to imagine nightfall coming on and you to be without friends or succor in this town. And you are to ask yourself whether you would feel safer or less safe when you saw a dozen men coming towards you in the dusk, if you were to know that they had recently come from a prayer meeting. This is the, I think I can justifiably say I'm relaying to you, comrades, friends, brothers, sisters, the challenge that was put by the religious to me. You'll see at once it's not a yes-no answer. You can't give a yes-no answer to that, but I accept it anyway. I said, very well, I won't give a Sesame Street reply, but just without leaving the letter B, I have been in that situation. In Bombay, in Belfast, in Beirut, in Belgrade, in Baghdad, and many other places too. And I won't tell you about all of them, but let me just, as it were, fill in some of those latent blanks. In Belfast, the capital city of one of the provinces of this, our United Kingdom, as everybody here knows, everything, culturally, educationally, economically, politically, socially, has been very gravely retarded for at least a quarter of a century. Excuse me, at least half a century and maybe more since partition, and before that, because partition is both the outcome and the cause of sectarian warfare in this town, by the simple fact that there are people there who are willing to kill not just one another, but one another's children on the basis of what kind of Christian they are. Horrible things are done, not just in pubs and clubs, but on the streets, on housing estates, on university campuses in that city still, despite the relatively good news we've had today, where the situation remains dominated by barbaric sectarian party leaders, on this and no other basis. Both churches demand that their children are sent to separate schools. They each agree with the other that above all things, their own children must be protected from the faith of another faith. I don't think I need to elaborate very much more on how horrendous the consequences of that have been and how they are enshrined, by the way, in our own constitution, which mandates that our own head of the church is also the head of the state and of the armed forces, with all the ludicrous Windsor consequences that you get if you found a national church on the family values of Henry VIII. These conditions, which are farcical in England, Wales, and Scotland, are tragic and ugly, only a few minutes flying time from where we sit. If I pass on from Belfast to, say, Baghdad, where I've recently been, and without reopening any of the arguments about the rightness or otherwise of the coalition intervention in Mesopotamia, I think it can be granted by any fair-minded person that what was most needed in Iraq after 30 years of fascism and war was a period of reflection, a short interlude of calm during which Iraqis could look about themselves and decide perhaps for whom they'd like to vote, perhaps what kind of country they'd like to live in, what kind of federal system they might wish to evolve, and to do so unmolested by violence or terror. The parties of God have vetoed every hope of that process. The parties of God now have the Iraqi people in their jaws, and they're saying to them, it's not enough just to kill foreigners or to rail against Jews or Christians or secularists. That's nothing like enough. It's only in Iraq, not only, mainly, chiefly in Iraq, that it's considered perfectly all right, in fact, a religious duty to blow up the mosques, to destroy the religious schools of other Muslims, of the Muslims of another school, not unlike the pattern of Belfast. It's not enough to have faith, you must have the right version of your own faith, or risk death, mutilation, and humiliation, and the destruction, the immiseration, the torture of Iraqi society is something that all of us can read about every day. Suppose we're to go to Beirut, the pearl of the Levant, the most civilized and beautiful and cultured city of the Middle East, and to see what happens when, for politicized reasons, a sectarian constitution is in place which says that the president of Lebanon must always be a Maronite Christian, that the speaker of its parliament must always be a Shia, that its vice president must always be a Sunni, that the Druze must have their share, and so on, leaving out at the very bottom, I'm afraid, such forces as Kurds and Armenians, but making everyone defined in their citizenship by their faith. Do I need to elaborate what that's done to retard, to bankrupt, to beggar, to disfigure, and to degrade what could have been an ideally plural and diverse and happy society? Remaining with letter B, shall I say Banja Luka? Shall I say Belgrade? Or just say Bosnia? Again, one of the most civilized enclaves of the Balkans. For many years, protected by a secular constitution and the remains of what had been a secular and democratic republic. And just look what happens when it is decided that it is a matter of faith that determines your citizenship, your allegiance, your identity, your nature, your rights. See the recrudescence in the Europe of the late 20th and early 21st century of Catholic fascist parties we thought we'd left behind at Nuremberg, the Ustasha. The recrudescence of forces like the Chetniks, the Serbian Orthodox fascists who took exactly the same view except the other way around. See the craven way in which our spineless media, which always defers to people of faith, say that it was Serbs who shelled Sarajevo, or Croats who shelled Mostar, when what they should have been saying was, today the Christian Orthodox militia bombarded an open city around the clock, or yesterday the Catholic forces shelled Mostar from dawn till dusk. They didn't do it because it's a matter of taste. We're supposed to respect people of faith, and we're supposed to respect them while they do that and do that and make this sort of excuse. There aren't enough words in my lexicon, at any rate, to express the contempt that I think any right-thinking person must feel for this conscription of this kind of medieval barbarism. Joan will tell me when I've got a minute. I don't know whether I'm yet trespassing on my rivals and my allies' time, but if I was to add Bombay to this list, the city that was very nearly ruined by the sectarian partition of India in 1947, 1948, where once again people were told it's a matter of faith what kind of Indian you are. You may have to become a Pakistani if you're Muslim. You may have to lose your life on the proposition. You may not just be a Hindu. Bombay more or less survived this, the terrifying ethnic cleansing and the pogrom that ensued when the subcontinent was mutilated and maimed and partitioned on this basis in the hopes of a genuine Indian unity and independence, ruined by way of appeasement of people of faith. But Bombay sort of recovered until recently, when now its name has been changed, its minority citizens persecuted, intimidated, driven out by a new Hindu nationalist party, the Shiv Sena, that says that, again, if you do not follow the right God, if you don't accept the supernatural as a real force in everyday life, you are not worth whatever it takes to become or to remain or be treated as an ordinary, democratic, civilized human being in, again, one of the great cities of Asia. Now, it's not part of my case, and I'm sure it's not part of Professor Grayling's or Professor Dawkins' either, to say that religion is the reason for all of this, or the exclusive or sole reason for all of it. I think it would be crude and reductionist to say that. But who is going to argue, I'll be fascinated to see, who is going to argue that the matter of faith, that the religious allegiance, that the preachings of religion have not in all these cases gravely exacerbated, gravely deepened, gravely poisoned and prolonged all of these things that have made our tenuous civilization extremely difficult to defend, uphold, maintain, let alone to advance. I don't believe this case could be made. That's for a simple reason, because religion is not provided to us by revelation. It doesn't come from the heavens. It doesn't come from the beyond. It doesn't come from the divine. It's man-made, and it shows. It shows very well that religion is created, invented, imposed by a species half a chromosome away from the chimpanzee. It shows, doesn't it? Well, why do we deceive ourselves on this point? And is there anywhere, I'm now going to wind up, is there anywhere of the places I've mentioned, and I exempt Basra and all the other B's I could take you around, where it wouldn't be enormously welcome if there was a mass conversion to secularism, or a mass adoption of the secular idea and principle, of the principles of Bertrand Russell, who once spoke famously from this platform, of Thomas Paine, of Thomas Jefferson, of Voltaire, and others. And I'll close by saying that I want you to be on your guard against two false issues in this respect, and I'll be very brief. When I mentioned those gentlemen, and I could mention some ladies too in this connection, like Mary Wollstonecraft, don't let anyone tell you that, oh well, secular tyranny is just as bad. After all, there have been fascist and communist dictatorships which have been just as revolting. Fascism, as you know, was supported by the Catholic Church all through its life, and in fact till after it had died, and still is defended.
In America, 90% of the nation would claim to be religious, and you define this in a way that's unambiguous. You don't say, well, do you go to church every Sunday? You don't ask that question. Plenty of people go to church who are not religious. They go to get a date, or so they go for the cupcakes or something. They don't go to be spiritually enlightened. So you ask a different question. You say, is there a God that listens to your prayers? If you answer yes to that, you're religious by anybody's definition, because your understanding of a deity is that that deity is monitoring your daily affairs. So that's unambiguous. about this number's dropped in the last couple of years, but it's about 90%. Turns out if you go to college and get an advanced degree, a master's or a doctorate, where these are degrees where you actually question the state of existing knowledge. The undergraduate degree doesn't really do that. You're learning from textbooks that are written by somebody else. Your doctrines are already there. The higher degrees imply that you are questioning the very fabric of the knowledge you had previously learned. Among that community, it's 60%. It has dropped. Well, that's interesting. Let's keep going. How about scientists of all stripes? So biologists, chemists, let's include engineers as well, people who have formal scientific training, mathematicians as well. Okay, what happens next? Drops to 40%. Now, if you look at this number, it looks like, wow, so scientists, the public is 90%, scientists are 40%. No, the drop is not that significant because every scientist has an advanced degree. So in fact, the drop is not from 90 to 40, the drop is from 60 to 40. So becoming a scientist is not as big an effect on whether you're religious as you might otherwise think. Most of the drop comes because you're educated beyond the level of college. So that's 40%. So now you go to elite scientists, members of the National Academy, highly accomplished subset among scientists, the number drops to 7%. There was a headline in Nature, the British journal Nature, which said after this study was released, 93% of elite scientists reject God. So that was supposed to be a shocking headline. And I look at that and I said, that's not even interesting. That was the trend line anyway. What's more interesting, which was not the headline, is that 7% of elite scientists pray to a God. Isn't that a more interesting fact to you? Isn't that kind of interesting? The most accomplished scientists in the world, in that community, 7% of them still pray to a personal God. I think that is deserving of more study than the 93% who don't. Because something's going on there. We don't know what. And I have confronted people on this. I would say, to the most sort of vociferous in the atheist community, I would say, you're beating the public over the head, telling them, why are you doing it? And I'm thinking, before you beat the public, why don't you beat them over the head, okay? No, I'm just saying, if you're gonna rank, if you just, because you understand that first, because if you can't convert that 7%, you've got no hope in the general public. That's all I'm saying. This is among the ranks of the scientifically educated. Now, philosophers basically invented atheism. And if you do this, if you check the statistic for philosophers, it's below 1%. There are no the only religious philosophers there are, they're like theologian philosophers, all right? If you subtract the theologic philosophers, this number is essentially zero, all right? So they're basically birthed atheism, the philosophers. And there's this talk, I don't know here in Australia, does the Bible in the public school class or not? No, is it by law or is it just by tradition? Is it by law? Okay, so in America there's this understanding that the state and the church are separate. And by and large that's been honored for most of the history of the country, by and large. And what's interesting about America, a point that was a little bit alluded to earlier today, is that it was founded on the principle that the state has no religion. The state is indifferent to what religion you might have. So that means there's no authority over you that's going to tell you who and what to worship. And that's a state that we all take for granted, but so many places in the world that is not true. Well, there's a case in New Jersey where a middle school kid was lectured to by the history teacher in a public school, and the history teacher said, if you don't accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you are going to hell. And there's a little Muslim girl there, said you are already damned to hell. First point. Second, that Noah had dinosaurs on his ark. Third point he made is that Big Bang and evolution are just theories and you can take them or leave them. So, I don't, like I said, I don't get into these. I just don't. We got people who do this. We've got the four horsemen. We got our boy here who's coming up after. We got people who fight this stuff. I'm not one of those, really. I'm doing this because, like, I know you're all, this is the bone I'm throwing you, but I don't do this. So, but then I thought about it and I said, I have an op-ed, a letter to the editor on this that I can write. And I left out the part about Jesus. I left that out. Because if that's how he feels, he wants you to be Christian, that's okay, fine. I left that out. I went to the rest of what he said. And this was my letter, as it appeared in the New York Times. People cited violation of the First Amendment when a New Jersey, that's a separation of church and state, essentially. New Jersey school teacher asserted that evolution and the Big Bang are not scientific and that Noah's Ark carried dinosaurs. The case is not about the need to separate church and state. It's about the need to separate ignorant, scientifically illiterate people from the ranks of teachers. That's the problem. If he wants to believe Jesus is his savior, that's not synonymous with being scientifically illiterate, because 40% of American scientists pray to a personal God. What is identical with being scientifically literate is that if Noah was a human being, he did not have dinosaurs on his ark, because humans and dinosaurs did not coexist, all right? Every one of those scientists knows that, even the 40% who pray to God. So this is how I've sort of split the kingdom there. Then you get the billboard wars. Okay, this was fun. Big Bang Theory. You got to be kidding. God. All right. So this goes on. This is what we put up with. All right. So then then there was like, let's come back. Praise Darwin, evolved beyond belief. Freedom from religion found it. So the billboard wars are in progress here. There's some people who are like okay with God and okay with sort of how things evolve, so they ride the fence. So here's a bumper sticker, the Big Bang Theory, God spoke and bang, it happened, So they're excited about both, God and the Big Bang. But then we had this idiot back in May, Judgment Day. Did this Judgment Day stuff reach below the equator? Jeez, okay. Yeah, it was. Now the good thing is unlike other predictions, like Jesus will come one day, this had a date, okay? You could test it. This was like easy to test. You just sort of wait around for it, all right? So, now it turns out that May 21st was only the day Jesus was supposed to show up. The actual end of the world is October 21st. So the end of the world is still to come this year. This is directly from the website. So I had to tweet. So this is May 21st. So on May 21st or May 20th, I tweeted this. If Jesus actually arrives May 21st, it'll be easy to convince skeptics. If he doesn't show up, do the faithful become atheists? That was my question. Now, in a Twitter stream, it's a live conversation with complete strangers. Everybody depositing their 140 characters worth of thought. So here this is. There was a huge reaction to that tweet. Now, you would expect that most of my followers, or at least a big fraction of them, would be sort of atheistic. So you'd expect people to say, this guy's an idiot, why are we even spending any time on them? Well, one such person did make such a reply, but not in the way you might think. No, anyone who's read the Bible knows this camping asshole was full of shit from the start. Okay. So what do you do with that? So this is somebody complaining about the prediction of Jesus coming because he says this other guy doesn't know jack about the Bible, but this guy does. And went on, there are other places where people quoted that one can't know when Jesus comes. So the fact that this guy's saying he knows means he doesn't read the Bible. So this is what's out there. People who are ready to vociferously argue about who knows the Bible the least. September 11th, 2001, we just had our 10th anniversary of that. I happen to live 3.5 blocks from what became known as Ground Zero. This image was taken outside my dining room window. The North Tower is on fire. These are 110-story buildings, the World Trade Center towers. This image is the instant the South Tower was hit. It was hit from the left. You could not see the entry point because we're blocked by this other black building. It's a hotel, a 50-story hotel, which is just kind of in the foreground. You see part of the South Tower punching out. This is before the jet fuel had ignited. And when you ignite jet fuel, you set a deflagration wave, not a bomb wave. It's a different kind of wave. It's not accompanied by a shock. This is a split second after that. The fuel has ignited, creating more pressure. And within a split second of that, the entire South Tower was engulfed. And this is fragments of plane and bodies and office coming out the other side. Now, why am I dragging you through this? 62 minutes later, both buildings had collapsed. And there was blue sky where there was once these buildings. This is directly outside of my apartment building, and the emergency vehicles had come. This is the pulverized World Trade Center dust that had settled several inches of it. I say this because shortly after this gentleman got up, President of the United States, George W. Bush. This is actually my photo of him. I was in that room at that time when he spoke. See the medals there on the table? I was on a committee to tell him who to give those medals to, the Presidential Medal of Science. And so he actually gave them to everyone we told him to give them to, except he didn't read their citations. He's smart enough to know not to pronounce any of the science words that were in the citation. So he put the medal around the neck, somebody else read the citations. Shortly after September 11th, he gets up, I don't remember where he gave the speech, and he says, in an attempt to distinguish we from they, he says, our God is the God who named the stars. This is before I was on his Rolodex. You know, I could have saved him from himself, okay? It's a loose quote from Genesis that says God named all the stars in the sky, okay? First of all, it's the same God, so he's got that wrong. But Allah, God of Islam, and God of the Jewish God, it's the same God. They call them different names, but it's the same book delivering you the same God. Apart from him getting that wrong, he says, our God is the God who named the stars. What he just didn't know, 2/3 of all stars in the night sky have Arabic names. 2/3 of all stars that have names these are all the Arabic star names. All of these. I don't think this is the point he wanted to make. I just think he figured that out. Like I said, it was before I was on his Rolodex. And so you say, well, how does this happen? How do you get a culture where stars in the night sky are named by them? What was going on? How did that happen? And you have to go back 1,000 years, and you get to Islam in what's the golden period of Islam. In that period, algebra was invented. Algorithm is an Arabic word. All these words that begin with AL, 10 to 1, it's an Arabic word. Our numerals are Arabic numerals. Did you pause and reflect on why we call them Arabic numerals? We just call them that, right? But somebody did good stuff with these numerals. It was in Baghdad 1,000 years ago where they invented algebra. And there was advances in mathematics, agriculture, engineering, all of these fields. All at a time when Europe was disemboweling heretics. So something changed. 12th century, this gentleman came around, Al-Ghazali, a Muslim scholar, learned. At this point, Islam is maybe just a few hundred years old. People are reading the Quran and interpreting it however they sort of want to and feel like it. There's not a coherence to the practice of Islam until he comes around and codifies the behavior of a good Muslim. In much the same way St. Augustine, in his book Cities of God, codified what it is to be a good Christian. How do you burn the witches? There's a recipe for that. They got to be upside down so the blood does, It's a whole itinerary for how to be a good Muslim. And in his writings contain the assertion that the manipulation of numbers is the work of the devil. 2, actions that you see in nature are the will of Allah. Well, if you drop a stone and it falls, Allah willed that. If that's your explanation, your curiosity stops. You combine everything happening in nature being the will of Allah to the manipulation of numbers being the work of the devil, and the entire enterprise of that golden era collapses. Now, historians, when they look at that era, they say, well, the Mongols came and so historians think of the world in terms of wars and kings. They think less about it philosophically, about intellectual movements or the absence thereof. Islam rose again after this period, didn't have science associated with it. No new inventions in math. You look at the period of Islam in Spain, the period where the great Alhambra was built. There is no attendant science going on there. It's done, it's gone, and it is a cost that exists to this day. There is 1.3 billion Muslims in the world today who are not participants on the frontier of scientific discovery. What's the best measure of this? Just check out the Nobel Prizes. I tallied them, okay? How many Jews have won the Nobel Prize? In the sciences, here they go. 25% of all Nobel Prizes in the sciences are won by Jews. How many Jews in the world? About 15 million, tops? 15 million? How many Muslims in the world? 1.3 billion, which is huger, way huger than 15 million. How many Muslims have won the Nobel Prize in the sciences? 2.5. 2. I can't bring myself to call economics a science. I'm sorry. I just can't. I've tried. I've really tried. I'm sorry. That's how many. And the physics one was a Pakistani physicist, not a Middle Eastern physicist. So, Jews have 50 times the number of Nobel Prizes. They're 1/80th of the population of the Muslims. Has 4,000 times the impact. I lose sleep every night wondering how many secrets of the universe lay undiscovered because 1/6th of the population of the world is not a participant on the exploration frontier. What thoughts have gone undreamt of?
Rapper B.O.B., perhaps you know him for hits like Airplanes and Nothing on You. He firmly believes that the earth is flat. He is on a Twitter mission to prove it, and he says he has photographic evidence and that we've been fooled all this time.
All right, listen, B.O.B., once and for all. The earth looks flat because, 1, you're not far enough away at your size. 2, your size isn't large enough relative to Earth to notice any curvature at all. It's a fundamental fact of calculus and non-Euclidean geometry. Small sections of large curved surfaces will always look flat to little creatures that crawl upon it. But this whole thing, it's just a symptom of a larger problem. There's a growing anti-intellectual strain in this country. It may be the beginning of the end of our informed democracy. Of course, in a free society, you can and should think whatever you want. And if you want to think the world is flat, go right ahead. But if you think the world is flat and you have influence over others, as would successful rappers or even presidential candidates, then being wrong becomes being harmful to the health, the wealth, and the security of our citizenry. Discovery and exploration got us out of the caves, and each generation benefits from what previous generations have learned. Isaac Newton, my man, said, if I have seen farther than others, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. I get an amen. Woo. So that's right, B.O.B. When you stand on the shoulders of those who came before, you might just see far enough to realize the earth isn't flat. And by the way, this is called gravity.
Science does not rule out the existence of a creator by definition, because we don't know how the universe began. Full stop. That's it. We don't know. Right? We have a theory of what might have happened before the Big Bang, a theory called inflation, which says that the universe was still around but doing something else. But we're still left with the question, how did that start? How did the universe have a beginning? And if so, how did it begin? The answer is we don't know. Full stop. So you can't read it. So from the scientific perspective, it is wrong to say that science has anything to say at all about the nature of a creator, or the can be, because we don't know. That's
yes.
Now, all I say is that I don't personally have any faith. I don't have a personal faith. Now, and we can dig into that.
Do you mean faith as in pre-existing ideological structure that you used as a framework for your understanding of reality, or do you mean faith, a sort of an inward belief that there is beauty and great? Because when you said that humility and all that, that sounded like a faith.
Well, yeah. So I suppose it depends, and you could talk about this more actually. How you define the word. I mean, to me, all I mean when I say that is I don't have a religion that I adhere to. I don't. I do not know what the origin of the laws of nature is, and that's enough for me.
Yeah,
I don't really. I don't feel compelled. I'd love to know, but I don't feel compelled to go further than the statement that I don't know. And I think I said in one of my books, that's one of the greatest of mysteries.
Now, the reason I saw it fit to put together this compilation of these extremely smart, and no, I'm not glazing, smart individuals ruling against religion is to showcase my utter contempt for organized religion. And trust me, man, there is a lot of that in me. I genuinely believe that in the greater scale of things, nothing has caused more, both direct and indirect, human suffering and destruction than organized religions. But that's besides the point, man. Back to the importance of me putting together this treasure trove of information together. It's always fascinated me that scientists, most of whom are non-believers themselves, always approach religion with an interestingly aloof and almost accepting attitude that you'll never see coming from strong believers when it comes to scientists that dare to contradict the message within their fantasy novels. These scientists are not here to totally discount religion or advise that strong religious believers get sent to asylums or anything of the sort, even though religion is arguably the biggest obstacle to scientific innovation after finances. Because remember, you have entire countries and cultures that will stifle scientific progress if it's at the cost of their religious practices. And just to make it clear, I'm not an atheist either. I'm what you would describe as agnostic at best. I'd bet that there is probably a designer for the intricate universe we inhabit. But if you start going off on how you think the God you worship is the right one, unlike everyone else's, then you've certainly lost me. So yeah, I guess the moral of the message is that religious people can learn a few things from these brilliant fellows and be willing to change their minds in the event they're presented with factual information that contradicts their faith. This actually reminds me of something I remember talking about in a short video not long ago. Here it is. Here's a fun fact about religions. They have family trees just like we humans do. Each one of them is based on a different one, but the earliest ones are actually nowhere to be found. Take Christianity, for example. It's based on Judaism, the Roman state religion, and Neoplatonism. Islam, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Mormonism all derive from Christianity, Baha'i derives from Islam, etc., etc. And basically, the moral of the story is that once you trace the parent thoughts associated with a religion, you will have a much harder time convincing yourself that you're right and everyone else is wrong. Some of them are straight up general and don't need a history lesson to get discounted, if you're being honest. Peace. And now to top off everything we've heard from these scientists, here are additional religious facts I learned from them that couldn't really fit into this video because it would have been 3 hours long. Yeah, so let me know what you think in the description section below. I recently came across the weird religious fact that if you shout Allahu Akbar moments before you pass away, that you'll get to sleep with 72 virgins in heaven. But then a Muslim brother responded that he'd read somewhere that the word virgin in the Quran was actually misinterpreted and the word is actually raisins or olives. That obviously sent me into a whole new rabbit hole, and I'm not here to deny nor accept that fact. That's not my place. I just personally don't understand how 72 olives is motivation for anyone to do something horrific that could supposedly get them into heaven. Yeah, anyway, something has always bothered me about religions over the last 1,000 years or so. We see across all religious books that God's intentions and expectations for or from humanity change over time as human societies evolve. For example, when you go from the vicious God of the Old Testament compared to the non-violent and compassionate God of the New Testament. If God could evolve, for lack of a better word, through these times, who are we to assume that his intentions haven't evolved over the last 1,000 or 2,000 years that religious texts haven't been updated? Did you know that in temples across India, Hindu ladies usually shave their heads and offer their hair to the temples as a sacrifice, either for luck and fortune or as a symbolic gesture for surrendering one's ego? The temples, however, then usually turn around and sell that hair to the West and the rest of the world so it can be used to make hair extensions and wigs in the billion-dollar industry. I honestly don't know why that doesn't really surprise me anymore. All religions are the same, honestly. Did you know that the Catholic Church considers beavers to be fish? And the reason behind it is just another proof religious leaders will categorize the natural world, not according to science, but however they desire for convenience's sake. Basically, when Catholic missionaries arrived in America, they found Native Americans who had very different means of survival than the Europeans. These missionaries went on to successfully convert a large proportion of the indigenous population, but there was one rule the natives just couldn't bring themselves to obey, and that's the no meat eating rule on Fridays during Lent. The natives loved their beaver meat. So to get around this, the Bishop of Quebec approached his superiors in the church and asked for his flock to be permitted to eat the meat. And since the semi-aquatic rodent was a skilled swimmer, the church decided, you know what, from today henceforth, beavers are fish and scientific classifications. I've personally never understood why religion has to be at odds with science, honestly. At the foundation of every religion is the belief that everything we can perceive was created by potentially some higher force. And it's obvious that science is miles away from ever figuring out the answer to that question. I think the only reason these two are at odds, honestly, is that religious leaders have decided that what was dictated by some religious leaders millenniums ago should hold any weight today, which to me sounds like it will be even more offensive to God. Humans assuming that they really finally understand God's intentions, what he desires from humanity, or even how he designed the universe. That seems more crazy. And even more important, we see across all religious books that God's intentions and expectations for or from humanity change over time as human societies evolve. For example, when you go from the vicious God of the Old Testament to the non-violent and compassionate God of the New Testament, there is a stark difference. So my question is, if God could evolve, for lack of a better word, through these times, who are we to assume that his intentions haven't evolved over the last 1,000 or 2,000 years that religious texts haven't been updated? I have a question that most of you have asked as well, or at the very least have come across. Does there exist any two unrelated religions that share doctrines, mythologies, or even a name for their god? They have to be religions that have never intertwined in any sense of the word throughout history, because I haven't come across a single one, man. And I wonder what that says about God, if he exists and is really all powerful. Does there exist any? Help me out, guys.